World War II was drawing to a close, and the waters of the Pacific, witness to bloody battles, seemed calm on the night of July 29, 1945. However, they would soon become terrifying again. Sailing across the ocean was the USS Indianapolis, a massive American cruiser that had just completed a mission of historic significance and whose crew was now torn between routine and exhaustion. They were unaware that every second brought them closer to disaster. The tranquility was finally shattered when a Japanese submarine entered the scene. Stealthily, the enemy stalked coldly until it was time to attack. That peace turned into an endless hell that lasted several days and was filled with deadly challenges for the American sailors: fire, hunger, and even sharks. In this new installment of military history, we'll learn all about one of America's greatest naval tragedies during World War II. Stay with us, because the action is about to begin. The USS Indianapolis was no ordinary ship. It was born to make history. Launched in 1931 as a Portland-class heavy cruiser of the United States Navy, it quickly became the jewel of the Navy. It was nearly 190 meters long, had a powerful armament, and an incredible range of 19,000 kilometers, allowing it to operate for extended periods without refueling. In 1936, it was chosen to carry then-President Franklin Roosevelt on a tour of South America that reached Argentina. Then, when World War II broke out and the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor prompted American involvement, it was sent to the Pacific, where it fought for years. In March 1945, a Japanese plane managed to overcome anti-aircraft gunfire and carried out a desperate kamikaze attack. It crashed into the deck of the Indianapolis, but failed to sink it. The ship, even damaged and with a huge hole, was able to make the entire return trip to the United States for repairs. It seemed the war was over for the crew, but their most important mission still awaited them. After several months of preparations, Commander Charles Butler McVeigh III was informed that his men had to set sail again. The destination was Tinian Island, and the operation was a top secret. They had to transport a package as quickly as possible without questioning its contents. Among the crew members was Edgar Harrell.
On July the 16th, 1945, at Hunters Point, San Francisco, we looked out on the dock and we saw all kinds of Navy Marine brass out there, and we knew something was up, and then we saw a little truck come up with a large crate on it, and our crane aboard ship reached over and picked that up and set it on the quarterdeck.
The cargo was guarded by 2 armed men, and no one on the crew was allowed to approach. Furthermore, orders stated that in the event of a shipwreck, the cargo would have priority over the sailors. The reasons for these striking actions were finally revealed. What the USS Indianapolis was carrying was uranium and other components for the atomic bombs that would be dropped shortly after on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The ship completed its objective without any problems and continued on its way. Its new destination was the Philippines, where it was to remain on alert for possible Japanese attacks. The route it would travel was dangerous, but reports indicated that these were safe waters, and several weeks had passed without enemy activity in the area. Despite McVeigh's request for an escort, the Indianapolis began its journey unaccompanied by the battleships, which sealed its fate. On the night of July 30th, 1945, the lives of its 1,196 crew members changed forever. Just 10 minutes after midnight, a Japanese submarine detected the USS Indianapolis. The commander in command of the Asian vessel was Mochitsura Hashimoto, an experienced strategist with a clear vision of the target. He observed the American cruiser through the periscope and knew this was a unique opportunity. He gave the order, and his crew executed the preparations with clockwork precision. In silence, the submarine's holds filled with tension as they loaded the torpedoes, lethal weapons known for their range and destructive capacity. From the bowels of the Japanese vessel, 6 projectiles were launched. Aboard the American ship, everything was proceeding normally. They were unaware of what was about to happen until they felt an explosion, followed by a small earthquake. The shock lasted a few seconds, but immediately followed by screams, smoke, and running. The second explosion quickly followed. The ship shook uncontrollably again. It didn't take an expert to recognize the severe damage. However, they were confident they could minimize the situation, as they had done with the kamikaze attack. But now it was different. The commander ordered several hatches sealed. Behind them were dozens of sailors doomed to die. It was the only way to maintain hope of saving the others. Within a couple of minutes, everyone realized the situation was very serious. The damage was extensive. There was fire everywhere, and the USS Indianapolis was sinking. 2 of the powerful torpedoes had hit with deadly precision. The first hit the bow, causing an explosion that literally tore through the forward compartments of the ship. The men in that section died instantly, as the flames spread like a voracious predator. The second shell hit one of the engine rooms, destroying the communication systems and leaving the cruiser unable to send a distress signal. The crew knew exactly what was going on, and that's how Harold remembers it.
The first torpedo cut the bow of the ship off, which was within 30 or 40 feet of me, and I knew that the bow of the ship was cut off. The second one was back under number 2 turret, the big 8-inch gun, and a massive explosion. All that powder magazine went up, and so you knew the ship was doomed. And
desperation dominated the scene after the Japanese attack. If you were aboard the USS Indianapolis, you could look in any direction, and the scene would be the same: complete chaos. There was no time or way to get all the lifeboats out. Only a few were launched into the water before the order to abandon ship could be given. And a similar situation arose with the life jackets. Those who could, did so. But a large percentage of the crew had nothing to help them face their imminent future in the cold waters of the night. Regardless, they didn't hesitate for a second. They jumped into the water, escaping the disaster or trying to extinguish the flames that had reached them.
well, I ended up in the water as to go to the port side and hold on to that rail, look out into the blackness of the night, and the ship is leaving you, and you know you're desperate to get off, and you look at that half-inch of black oil, but you're going to go into that.
The ship sank in 12 minutes, leaving more than 300 men inside. About 880 remaining sailors struggled to stay alive in the dark sea. Some swam for hours. They had begun swimming to get away from the ship's suction and then continued, not knowing why. There was nowhere else to go, but the Americans were confident. They were well prepared and knew that their country's Navy had developed a highly effective rescue system in the event of a shipwreck. It would take a couple of hours to find them, or so they thought. The fight against a cruel death was just beginning. As soon as dawn broke, the survivors tried to gather together and count their numbers, but it was an impossible task. Hopes for a quick rescue remained intact, and the sunrise was welcomed as a blessing. It meant a bit of warmth after hours in the icy water. However, that relief was short-lived. After a few hours, the rays began to burn them. They covered their heads with whatever they could, but above all they had to protect their eyes from the glare that blinded them as they struggled to stay afloat and not get separated from the other castaways. When darkness fell, the men felt renewed solace, albeit again for a short time. Once again, the cold had appeared, in a diabolical cycle that seemed to offer not a single moment of relief. As if that weren't enough, they had to deal with the losses that began to accumulate as the wounded gave up. But the duel lasted only a few minutes. With only a few rafts and life preservers for the entire group, practicality was essential in the survival equation.
Help me get his off. What are you doing? He doesn't need it anymore. He can make it, Captain. Help me.
When morning arrived on the second day of the shipwreck, the men's concern was the sun's rays returning to burn them. However, something much worse was about to happen. Attracted by the human movement, an unexpected group of sharks began stalking the crew of the USS Indianapolis. Fear filled them, but they tried to remain calm and formed figures to protect themselves, fooling the beasts into believing they weren't easy prey. Their attempts were mere illusions. These predators were ready to eat, and the attacks were swift.
All hands out of the water! Up and double!
Get out of the water! Get up! Get your feet out! Give me your head! Get
up! Ideas emerged, such as screaming and kicking as loudly as they could when the sharks approached. However, although they sometimes moved away, more often they simply fixed their black eyes on their prey and pounced. The men saw the approaching fins and were powerless to stop them. Sometimes they passed under one, only to bump into it as they moved on to the next floating, bleeding body. It's impossible to know how many of the American sailors fell victim to these sea creatures, nor is it possible to know how many were still alive at that moment. All we know for sure is that that morning, the water changed color. It had turned red. The blood gradually dissolved into the vast ocean, and the sharks, although they never stopped stalking, had apparently grown weary of hunting. But just when it seemed that there might be at least a minimal moment of peace, there came a time of thirst, hunger, and despair. Despite the warning not to do so, several of the men drank the salty seawater and began to hallucinate. This led some to believe the man next to them was a Japanese. And so, the attacks among the castaways quickly increased. Many had already lost their minds. Not 2, not 3, but 5 days had passed until, on August 2nd, Chuck Gwynn, the U.S. Navy pilot, became an unlikely hero. He was making a routine flight in a seaplane when he spotted something strange in the water. After a few minutes, he realized they were men, and his first thought was that they were Japanese. At that point in the conflict, it was the Asians who usually ended up defeated and ready to surrender. However, as he got closer, he discovered they were his countrymen fighting for survival. Gwynn reported what he had found and then disembarked. He assisted those he could, but the main rescue effort took place during the rest of the day, when several boats arrived to collect the remaining shipwrecked sailors. Only 317 of the 1,196 crew members who set sail aboard the USS Indianapolis survived. 2 of them died within hours. The news went almost unnoticed in the U.S. press. The definitive dominance of Japan was the main headline, and there was no room for bad news. Days later, the use of atomic bombs and the Allied victory in World War II meant that the story of the Indianapolis was forgotten for more than 70 years. Until 2017, a mission funded by Paul Allen, one of the founders of Microsoft, was able to locate the enormous ship near the Philippines.
That's it, Paul. We've got it. The Indy.
Lo tenemos, es el Indy. 72 años después de desaparecer bajo el agua, el buque de guerra USS Indianapolis ha sido hallado a más de 18.000 pies de profundidad, el equivalente a 5,5 kilómetros en el Océano Pacífico.
The sinking of the USS Indianapolis is not only a reminder of the horrors of war, but also of the courage and resilience of those who faced the unimaginable. Over the years, this story has had a greater impact on American society, which today pays tribute to those who fell in the worst sinking of a U.S. military ship. With only 317 survivors, the tragedy of the Indianapolis demonstrates that even in victory, war exacts an immense price. And so we come to the end of our video. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in our next installment of Military History.